The night sky over the channel was veiled in mist. Beyond the rolling sea, faint lights flickered, not of cities, but of ships. The wind carried a scent of salt, pine, and iron. It was the same wind that once filled the sails of men called Northmen, wanderers from frozen lands who dreamed of softer shores. They came not as armies first, but as raiders. Small bands slipping through rivers, their oars biting into dark waters. The people of Francia called them Normanni, the men of the north. And over time, that name would become their destiny. From warriors to settlers, from pirates to princes, the Normans would learn the art of building kingdoms as fiercely as they once burned them. In the fertile valley of the Seine, they found a home. They raised timber halls, married local women, learned the language of priests, and bent their knee to the Frankish king, but only on paper. For in their hearts, the sea still whispered. Their sons would grow into men who blended the strength of the Viking with the cunning of the French. They would conquer not for plunder, but for permanence. From Rouen to Sicily, from Hastings to Jerusalem, the Norman spirit would change the map of Europe. Tonight, as the waves whisper against distant cliffs, imagine a small fire burning in a Norman camp by the river. The men around it speak softly, sharpening blades, dreaming not of gold, but of destiny. For their story of faith, ambition, and fate would begin not in the halls of kings, but in the hearts of wanderers. And that story begins here. In the early 10th century, the northern world trembled under the sound of Viking prows. They came from Denmark, Norway, and the fjords of icy Norway, swift as storms, relentless as winter. But one among them, a man named Rollo, sought more than raids. Rollo was a giant in the sagas, fierce, cunning, and shrewd. When his ships entered the Seine, he was no longer just a marauder. He was a negotiator. The Carolingian king, Charles the Simple, weary of endless attacks, offered him a bargain. In 911, by the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte, Rollo was granted the lands around Rouen, the seed that would grow into Normandy. In return, he swore to protect Francia from his own kind. Thus began one of history's strangest transformations. Vikings became lords, raiders became rulers, and a patch of frontier became a duchy of order and ambition. The Normans adapted quickly. They built castles of stone and faith, learned Latin from monks and French from courtiers. They baptized their children and christened their long ships anew. But beneath the hymns, their hearts still beat with northern rhythm. Adventurous, proud, always reaching outward. Rollo's descendants would turn Normandy into one of medieval Europe's most disciplined states. By the 11th century, it stood as a land of iron discipline and burning ambition. Their dukes, especially William, the bastard son of Duke Robert, grew up in peril. As a child, William saw assassins sent for him in the night. As a man, he would turn that fear into resolve. The Norman lords who followed him were a brotherhood of warriors, landless knights, sons of the sea. They craved glory, and their duke promised them just that. Across the narrow sea lay England, fractured by rivals and divided by ambition. And in 1066, with sails full of wind and faith, William would cross it. But that is for another night. For now, picture Normandy, green fields, rising keeps, and the echo of church bells over the mist. The sons of the north had found their home, but their eyes still gazed beyond the horizon. The year was 1066, and across the English Channel, two worlds prepared to collide. To the Normans, it was destiny. To the English, it was the storm that would end an age. When Edward the Confessor, King of England, died childless, His throne became a prize no man could ignore. The island was rich, its fields fertile, its monasteries heavy with silver. To William, Duke of Normandy, that throne was not merely opportunity, it was a promise. Edward had once lived in Normandy, and rumor held he had named William his heir. But in England, another man wore the crown. Harold Godwinson, a native earl, chosen by the English nobles and blessed by the Archbishop himself. To William, it was betrayal. To the Normans, it was a call to arms. Through summer and storm, he gathered his army, not only Normans, but Bretons, Flemings, and men of fortune from every corner of France. Shipwrights in the harbors of Normandy worked day and night, shaping a fleet of over 700 ships. Monks prayed in cathedrals as smiths hammered swords that would soon cross the sea. Then came the sign. On the night of April 24th, 1066, a great comet burned across the sky. To the English, it was an omen of doom. To William, it was heaven's banner of fire. By September, Harold had already fought one battle, defeating an invasion from the north, where his own brother Tostig and the Norwegian king Harald Hardrada had landed. Harold's victory was brilliant but costly. His men were exhausted, and at that very moment, William landed in the south. They met at Hastings under a sky of smoke and cries. The Normans fought with discipline, their cavalry cutting through English lines that stood behind wooden shields. 3 times the Normans charged and were driven back. But William, ever patient, used cunning. He feigned retreat, and the English, breaking their formation to chase, opened their ranks. It was then that the Norman knights thundered forward. The shield wall broke, and by dusk, Harold lay dead, struck, legend says, by an arrow to the eye. On Christmas Day 1066, William knelt in Westminster Abbey, and the crown of England was placed upon his head. The chants of coronation were drowned by shouts outside. The English feared fire, thinking the Normans had come to kill again. Smoke filled the abbey as William rose, king of a land that would never be the same. The conquest did not end there. Across the countryside, Norman castles rose like iron teeth. Wooden halls were replaced by stone fortresses, symbols of new order, new law, and new fear. Norman bishops replaced Saxon priests, Norman knights claimed Saxon estates, and the very language of the court changed. In less than a generation, England became something new. No longer Saxon, not yet French, but Anglo-Norman. And at the center of it all was William, the Conqueror. He ruled with a balance of steel and faith, building cathedrals as he built fortresses, sending scribes to record every plow, every cow, every acre in his Domesday Book, as if even the earth itself should bear witness to his rule. Yet behind his iron crown, the man who once rode from Rouen still saw the sea. The same wind that carried his ancestors from the north still called him home. But William would never return to Normandy in peace. His conquest had built an empire, but it had also sown its first shadow. For as the Normans grew rich in England, their gaze turned south again, toward the sunlit lands of the Mediterranean. And soon, the same restless spirit that carried them from fjords to kingdoms would drive them once more into unknown seas. Long before the smoke of Hastings faded, other Normans were already chasing the sun, not in the green hills of England, but far to the south, across the Alps and into the shimmering heart of the Mediterranean. They had come first as pilgrims, then as mercenaries. Restless men, second sons, landless knights, bound not by titles, but by hunger for fortune. Italy, in the 11th century, was a patchwork of princes and popes, Byzantines and Arabs, Lombards and Greeks. To a Norman, it was chaos, and chaos was opportunity. In the dusty plains of southern Italy, they found their calling. The locals called them the men with iron hearts. The Normans fought for whoever paid them, changing sides as the tides of power turned. But slowly, as they always did, they learned to rule what they once raided. Among them rose one family that would outshine all others, the Hautevilles. Their story began with a small knight from Normandy named Tancred of Hauteville, who sent his sons south to make their fortune. Those sons, especially Robert Guiscard and Roger, would carve kingdoms from a land of ruins. Robert was the fox of Apulia, cunning, ambitious, unpredictable. He fought Lombards, Byzantines, and even popes, sometimes all in the same year. His brother Roger, quieter but no less determined, turned his eyes across the sea to Sicily, a land ruled by Arabs for more than 2 centuries, where mosques and churches stood side by side and the scent of orange blossoms floated through the air. In 1061, Roger landed on Sicily's northern shore with barely 60 knights. The task seemed impossible. The island was rich, defended by walls, guarded by seasoned emirs. But like Rollo at Rouen or William at Hastings, Roger did not retreat. He fought year after year, village by village, valley by valley, until the crescent banners of the Arabs gave way to the crosses of the Normans. By 1091, Sicily was his. A new kingdom was born, not of pure blood or faith, but of mixture. Greek architects, Arab scholars, and Latin priests all served under the Norman crown. In Palermo, Roger's successors would build palaces lined with Arabic mosaics, domes like Byzantine stars, and arches carved with Latin prayers. In that strange harmony, the Normans created one of medieval Europe's most dazzling courts. Robert Guiscard, meanwhile, dreamed of even greater conquests. He sailed east to fight the Byzantines, seeking to plant the Norman banner on the walls of Constantinople. He would die before he reached it. But his ambition left a mark. The Normans were no longer mere invaders. They were kings, princes, and crusaders. Across 3 generations, the sons of the North had conquered lands that once belonged to emperors. They ruled the cold fields of England and the golden orchards of Sicily. They built abbeys where once they burned them. They studied, traded, prayed, and still they fought. But in their rise lay a quiet irony. Each Norman generation grew further from the sea. The sons of raiders had become nobles, the sons of nobles, rulers, and the rulers, surrounded by silk and marble, began to forget the wind that once made them strong. For now, though, their power seemed endless. The Duke of Normandy was a king in England. The sons of Hauteville were princes in Sicily. And soon, another call would reach them, a cry from the east, where holy lands awaited redemption and glory under the blazing cross of the Crusade. The 11th century drew its breath before a storm that would sweep across continents. From the pulpits of Rome came a cry that echoed through every castle in Europe: Deus vult, God wills it. The age of the Crusades had begun. For the Normans, that cry sounded like destiny calling once more. They had conquered the green fields of England and the golden coasts of Sicily. But their restless hearts still hungered for glory beyond the horizon. Now, under the sign of the cross, they saw their ancient appetite for conquest sanctified. Among the first to answer was Bohemond of Taranto, son of Robert Guiscard. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a mind as sharp as his sword, Bohemond had inherited both his father's cunning and his ambition. He gathered a host of Norman knights, veterans of Italy and Sicily, and joined the great expedition eastward in 1097, bound for the Holy Land. When their ships landed on the shores of Asia Minor, the Normans found a world older and stranger than their own. A land of Byzantine intrigue, Turkish cavalry, and desert heat that melted armor and will alike. Yet, true to their spirit, they thrived in hardship. At the siege of Antioch, Bohemon's leadership turned the tide. For months, the Crusaders starved outside its walls, gnawed by hunger and disease. Despair spread through the camps until Bohemon's spies found a weakness in the city's defenses. One night, under flickering stars, a gate was opened by a secret ally. The Normans stormed through, swords glinting in torchlight, cries of victory mingling with the roar of fire. When dawn broke, Antioch was theirs, and Bohemond, true to his lineage, did not surrender his prize to any other. While others marched on to Jerusalem, he made himself Prince of Antioch, carving yet another Norman kingdom from foreign soil. Elsewhere, in the same crusade, Tancred, Bohemond's nephew, followed his uncle's banner. He fought not for wealth, but for faith, a rare flame in an age of ambition. When the Crusaders reached Jerusalem in 1099, it was Tancred who was said to have been among the first to scale the walls. In the chaos that followed, he tried to protect civilians, offering sanctuary in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. A small act of mercy in a world of blood. The chronicles would call him the Knight of the White Plume. Noble, fierce, yet haunted by the cost of holiness. Through Bohemond and Tancred, the Norman legend spread from the forests of Normandy to the deserts of Syria. Their castles rose upon rocky hills. Their banners fluttered beside those of Franks and Lombards. For a moment, it seemed the Normans had conquered not only kingdoms, but time itself, leaving their mark from the mist of the Channel to the sands of the Holy Land. But with each victory came a shadow. The Norman gift for conquest had always burned too brightly. In Antioch, Bohemond's ambition drew envy and suspicion. His alliances crumbled, his dominion shrank. He died far from home, still dreaming of crowns that the earth would not yield. Tancred, too, died young, his armor traded for a pilgrim's shroud. His name carried only in whispered prayers of those who remembered a gentler knight among conquerors. When their bones turned to dust beneath foreign skies, the Norman wave began to ebb. Their strength had been born of hunger and unity, yet prosperity brought distance, and distance brought division. England, Sicily, Antioch. Each kingdom now stood alone, ruled by men who shared a name, but not a purpose. Still, the echo of their deeds lingered. In every castle that crowned a hill, in every cathedral arch that stretched toward heaven, one could still sense their spirit, that daring blend of steel and dream. The Normans had carried the fire of the North across 3 worlds. But soon, the fire would begin to dim, not through defeat, but through transformation, as they became part of the very civilizations they had once conquered. When William the Conqueror died in 1087, his body, swollen and heavy from years of war, could barely fit the coffin made for him. As his knights struggled to close the lid, the mourners recoiled at the sound of wood splitting. It was a strange, final symbol. The man who had outgrown everything, even his own coffin. Yet his legacy would not be buried. From the ashes of conquest, William and his descendants built a kingdom unlike any before. Under the Normans, England was transformed. The Saxon earls, proud and old, were replaced by Norman lords, men hardened in the discipline of continental warfare. They spoke French at court, Latin in church, and English only to their servants. The old order was swept away, a new one was carved from stone. Across the landscape, their castles rose, thousands of them, like silent sentinels of authority. First, wooden motte and bailey fortresses, then massive towers of limestone and flint. They were not just defenses. They were statements that the age of wooden halls was gone and the age of iron rule had begun. From London's White Tower to Durham's hilltop keep, each fortress marked a corner of Norman power. In their shadow, new towns grew, new laws spread, and the land itself seemed reshaped under their hand. But conquest alone did not hold a kingdom. William's genius and that of his heirs lay in administration. He sought to know every inch of his realm. In 1086, he ordered the creation of the Domesday Book, a vast survey listing every plough, every pig, every parcel of land in England. It was both an inventory and a declaration that nothing within this island escaped the king's gaze. The Normans brought with them not only swords, but systems of justice, taxation, and governance. They expanded royal authority beyond anything known in Anglo-Saxon England. Sheriffs enforced law in the king's name. Royal writs carried his seal across shires and forests. For the first time, England began to act as a single organism, centralized, methodical, efficient. The church, too, was reshaped. William appointed Norman bishops and abbots, loyal to Rome yet obedient to the crown. Great cathedrals rose: Winchester, Canterbury, Ely. Their arches high, their light filtered through new stone and faith. Under their vaults, Latin prayers replaced the old English hymns, and the rhythm of the kingdom changed forever. And yet, amid all this order, a quiet melancholy lingered. The Norman kings were never entirely at peace, not with their subjects, not with their heirs, and not even with themselves. William's sons quarreled and killed for power. His eldest, Robert Curthose, rebelled and was imprisoned by his own brother. The royal line split between England and Normandy, and the old bond between the two realms began to fray. Still, what the Normans had built endured. They gave England a new architecture, a new nobility, and a new sense of monarchy, one that would shape centuries to come. Their language mingled with the native tongue, weaving the first threads of Middle English, where French grace met Saxon earthiness. Every word of law, every phrase of courtly love, every knightly code whispered in the centuries after carried something of their mark. The Normans had come as conquerors, but they would remain as builders of a nation, a language, and a myth. And while England found a new order under the crown, far to the south, another Norman kingdom flourished, one of sunlight, mosaic, and silk, where kings spoke Latin, Greek, and Arabic alike. For the most dazzling jewel of the Norman world was not in London, but in Palermo. And there, under golden ceilings, the spirit of the North would take its most radiant form. By the 12th century, the Mediterranean shimmered under a Norman sun. From the hills of Palermo, the island of Sicily, once a frontier of Arabs and Byzantines, had become the jewel of Europe. Here, Norman kings built not just a kingdom, but a dream. Their ruler, Roger II, son of Count Roger of Hauteville, was unlike any monarch of his age. He wore robes woven in Arabic silk, spoke Latin with bishops, Greek with scholars, and Arabic with his court astronomers. His crown was shaped not by conquest, but by curiosity. Under his reign, Sicily became a crossroads of worlds, Christian, Muslim, and Greek. Each faith protected, each culture invited to flourish. Where William in England ruled by iron, Roger ruled by brilliance. He transformed Palermo into a city of marble and gardens, where the scent of citrus and jasmine drifted through arcades of carved stone. The Palatine Chapel, built within his palace, shone with a beauty that few have ever matched. A dome of golden mosaics, where Christ, angels, and saints looked down not from heaven, but from the gilded vaults above. The inscriptions on its walls were in Latin, Greek, and Arabic, 3 languages sharing the same light. It was as if the spirit of the Norman wanderer had found peace, not through war, but through harmony. In the royal workshops, artisans from across the world worked side by side. Byzantine mosaicists cut glass into stars, Muslim calligraphers traced verses in gold, Latin monks copied books by the light of oil lamps. Maps, charts, and instruments filled the libraries. Under Roger's command, Al-Idrisi, an Arab geographer, created the Tabula Rogeriana, the most accurate map of the known world, drawn in ink and wonder. This was no ordinary kingdom. It was a bridge between civilizations. While the rest of Europe fought holy wars, Sicily traded in peace with Cairo, Constantinople, and Tunis. Norman ships carried spices and silk, not just soldiers. The island became a beacon of tolerance in an age of fanaticism. But such harmony was fragile. After Roger's death, his heirs lacked his vision. His grandson, William II, ruled a court still beautiful, but brittle. The tides of politics shifted, and the delicate balance began to crumble. The papacy and the German emperors both looked southward, coveting Sicily's wealth. The Hohenstaufen dynasty, German princes through marriage, claimed the island after William's line ended. With them came new customs, new tongues, and the slow fading of the Norman soul that had once glowed so brightly. Yet even as their blood thinned into history, the Normans left behind something enduring, a reminder that conquest could give birth to culture, that the children of warriors could become patrons of wisdom. When the travelers of later centuries stepped into the Palatine Chapel, they found not the mark of destruction, but creation. Gold still shimmered where Norman hands once built. And though the dynasty was gone, its dream, a world where faiths and languages lived side by side, still whispered beneath the stones. For in that brief century, the Normans had done what few ever dared. They had turned the sword into a compass, and the empire of war into an empire of light. The 12th century, once filled with Norman triumph, began to darken like a fading sunset. The sons of the sea who had carved kingdoms across Europe now found themselves bound by the very walls they had built. In England, the death of Henry I, William the Conqueror's youngest son, in 1135, opened the gates to chaos. His only legitimate heir was a daughter, Matilda, a rarity in a world that still doubted the rule of women. When Henry's nephew, Stephen of Blois, seized the throne, the kingdom plunged into a brutal civil war. The chroniclers called it simply the Anarchy. For nearly 20 years, England bled. Castles burned, villages were plundered, and the Norman nobility, once united under a single crown, turned their swords on each other. The same disciplined lords who had followed William across the Channel now fought for rival banners, each claiming divine right, each believing himself the truer heir. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Normandy itself became a battleground. Kings of England and France clashed over its soil, both claiming dominion over the duchy that had birthed so many kings. Slowly, the balance tilted toward the Capetian monarchs of France. The once proud Norman heartland, cradle of conquerors, began to slip from English hands. The great age of the Norman dynasty was ending. And yet, from its ashes, something new was stirring. When Matilda's son, Henry II, finally took the English throne in 1154, he inherited not only England, but vast lands in France through his marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine. The result was an empire greater than anything William could have imagined, stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. But it was no longer purely Norman. It was Angevin, a fusion of peoples and powers, where the Norman name became part of a larger story. Still, the Norman legacy endured in the stones and the laws. Their castles still crowned the hills. Their language still shaped the speech of kings. Their system of justice, begun in William's day, evolved into the common law, whose echoes still reach courts far beyond England's shores. But their spirit, that restless hunger for new horizons, began to fade. The Normans had risen because they were outsiders, men of motion and daring. Now, as dukes, bishops, and kings, they had become what they once defied: settled, cautious, content. In Sicily, too, the Norman flame flickered. The arrival of the Hohenstaufen emperors, foreign rulers who married into the Sicilian line, marked the end of the independent Norman kingdom. Palermo's golden courts grew quiet, their scholars dismissed, their mosaics left to gather dust. The fusion of cultures that Roger II had nurtured slowly unraveled, replaced by the colder order of empire. The Normans had shaped half of Europe, and yet, within 2 centuries, they were vanishing into the tapestry of history. Their blood mingled with that of their subjects. But perhaps that was their true victory. They had begun as wanderers, men without a country. Through conquest, they had built realms that outlived their names. And though their banners fell, the world they created endured, in law, in language, in architecture, in the very rhythm of Western civilization. By the end of the 12th century, a traveler could stand on a hill in England, in Sicily, or even in Antioch, and still see the Norman hand in every tower, every arch, every cathedral that reached for heaven. Their story was no longer about conquest. It was about transformation. The Vikings had come seeking plunder. Their descendants left behind order. The age of the Normans was ending. But the world they built was only beginning to wake. When the clamor of Norman swords finally faded, what remained was not silence, but legacy. It whispered through the arches of cathedrals, the pages of law, and the tongue of a New England. Though the warriors themselves were gone, the world still spoke their name without realizing it. The Normans had conquered not only lands, but languages. In England, their arrival had split the world in 2. The high speech of lords and courts was French, while the earthy words of farmers and craftsmen remained Old English. Yet over generations, these voices mingled. The result was something astonishing. A new tongue balanced between elegance and strength. From Norman French came the words of power: court, justice, crown, honor, battle, courage. From the Saxons came the words of heart and hearth: home, love, field, bread, dream. Together, they formed Middle English, the language of Chaucer, of Shakespeare's ancestors, of an island reborn. The Norman genius for structure reached beyond words. They transformed religion too, not by changing faith, but by reshaping how faith looked and felt. Before their arrival, England's churches were humble, dark, built of wood and hope. The Normans raised cathedrals of light and stone, towers that reached for heaven, arches that taught men to look upward. Durham, Ely, Norwich, and Canterbury. Each became a monument to both faith and mastery, their pillars as massive as their ambition. This was Romanesque architecture, solid, round-arched, eternal. It reflected the Norman spirit perfectly, disciplined, ordered, yet touched by awe. From there, the style spread across Europe and later gave birth to the soaring Gothic. Even their castles became sermons in stone. To the peasants who toiled in the fields, the sight of a Norman keep on the horizon was both terror and protection, a symbol that authority had come to stay. Those castles were not mere walls. They were a language of power, one that spoke without words. In Sicily, their artistry took a softer, brighter form. There, under the Mediterranean sun, Norman builders blended Latin strength with Arabic grace. They borrowed domes and calligraphy, blended geometry with faith, and filled their churches with mosaics of gold that shimmered like captured sunlight. Nowhere else in Europe did such beauty exist, where angels wore Byzantine halos and Arabic artisans etched verses of paradise beside them. Their faith too evolved. Once fierce and simple, the Norman soul matured into something reflective. The same men who had followed Crusader banners now funded monasteries, scriptoria, and universities. The monks who copied books in their abbeys preserved not only scripture, but philosophy, science, and poetry, building the bridge that carried Europe from the dark centuries into the light of learning. And through it all, the Norman temperament remained: disciplined, practical, ambitious. They never built for beauty alone, but beauty was always the outcome. Centuries later, travelers from distant lands would marvel at their works without knowing whose hands had shaped them. They would gaze at a tower in London, a chapel in Palermo, a bridge in Normandy, and see strength, proportion, grace. The Normans had vanished into history, but their echo still rang. In every stone, every word, every law that bore their mark. Their empire of conquest was gone. But their empire of influence was only growing stronger, invisible yet eternal. And though the names of their kings faded, the world they built kept breathing. A world of structure, order, and human daring born from the chaos of the North. Every dynasty carries within it the echo of its founders. For the Normans, that echo thundered on long after their name faded from thrones. Through marriage, ambition, and war, their blood coursed into new veins, giving rise to kings and empires that would define the next 500 years. When Henry II took the English throne in 1154, he was not purely Norman. His mother, Empress Matilda, was William the Conqueror's granddaughter. His father, Geoffrey of Anjou, brought the fierce temper and cunning mind of the Angevin line. Together, their union created a new kind of monarch, one who ruled not as a conqueror, but as an administrator of empires. Henry was everything the Normans had been: disciplined, ambitious, unyielding, yet also more. He built roads and courts, sent royal judges across the land, and bound England under a web of law and loyalty. He was the architect of common law, the system that balanced crown and court, precedent and justice, a foundation that would outlive even his dynasty. But his reign was not peaceful. The same fire that made the Normans great also tore them apart. Henry's sons, Richard the Lionheart and John, turned against him, their rebellions echoing the ancient Norman hunger for power. Richard embodied the old warrior spirit, brave, restless, more knight than king. He spent barely 6 months in England during his 10-year reign, preferring the glory of the Crusades to the throne. At Acre and Jaffa, his banner, a golden lion, gleamed beside those of France and the Holy Roman Empire. He was the last true Norman Night King, reckless, magnificent, doomed. His brother John, by contrast, was a shadow of that legacy. Suspicious, cunning, and often cruel, John lost what William and Henry had built. In 1204, he surrendered Normandy itself to the King of France, an act that severed the last living bond between England and its Norman birthplace. Yet, even in defeat, the Norman influence endured. John's tyranny provoked rebellion, forcing him to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, a document that limited royal power and planted the first seeds of constitutional rule. From the iron discipline of Norman kings had emerged the very idea of lawful liberty. Meanwhile, the Norman blood spread across Europe's royal houses. In Sicily, through marriage, their line merged with the Hohenstaufen emperors, giving birth to Frederick II, one of the most brilliant rulers of the Middle Ages. Fluent in 6 languages, a patron of science and poetry, Frederick was called Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world. He was the last great flame of the Norman dream, a monarch who blended East and West, sword and scroll, reason and faith. But like the stars of their northern sky, even the brightest Norman lights burned out. By the 13th century, their name had become a memory, their titles absorbed, their lands divided. Yet their lineage lived on, hidden in crowns and coats of arms. The Plantagenets, who ruled England for 3 centuries, were Norman in blood and in mind. Their kings, from Edward I to Richard II, carried within them that same cold determination, that same instinct to build, to conquer, to order. Through them, the Norman temperament became the English character, proud, practical, unyielding. The Viking wanderers who once raided coasts had, through generations of transformation, shaped a nation of law and empire. Their legacy would sail farther than even their longships, across oceans, across centuries. And though their bones lay buried in Rouen, Bayeux, and Winchester, their blood still flowed in the veins of kings who ruled continents they could never have imagined. The Norman story had begun with a storm over the Channel. Now, its echoes reached across the world, no longer as raids of fire, but as the rhythms of civilization itself. Time has a way of softening conquest into memory. By the 13th century, the name Norman no longer inspired fear on the battlefield. The war cries had faded, the ships had rotted away, and the last of their kings slept beneath marble tombs. Yet their presence still lingered, not in armies, but in everything that remained standing. Their castles still crowned the hills of England, stone ribs beneath the skin of a new nation. Their cathedrals still reached upward, echoing the rhythm of prayer and the weight of discipline. Their laws still governed the disputes of farmers and nobles alike. The Normans were gone, and yet, somehow, still everywhere. History remembers them as conquerors, but their truest gift was transformation. They had come from a harsh northern coast where survival depended on strength and courage. They took that spirit with them, across the Channel, over the Alps, through the deserts of the Levant. And wherever they settled, they shaped the land into order. In Normandy, they learned from the Franks the art of government. In England, they built a kingdom of law. In Sicily, they created a paradise of tolerance and beauty. In Antioch, they carved a fleeting outpost of faith. Theirs was not a single story, but a pattern. The eternal dance between chaos and civilization, between motion and rest. The same blood that once drove them to raid monasteries now built them. The same ambition that burned villages gave birth to cathedrals. They had evolved, as all civilizations must, from destroyers into architects. Centuries later, the shadow of the Normans still touched distant shores. When English kings sent ships across the Atlantic, they did so in a language the Normans helped forge. When lawyers and judges in faraway lands spoke of precedent and justice, they echoed Norman law. And when Western art sought symmetry, and Western kings sought legitimacy, both reached back, consciously or not, to the Norman sense of order. Even in their myths, they endured. The Bayeux Tapestry, stitched by unknown hands, still tells their story. Ships crossing stormy seas, horses charging at Hastings, banners fluttering under the gaze of fate. Thread by thread, it captures the transformation of a people who refused to remain what they were. The world has seen greater empires, vaster, richer, more lasting, but few as strangely complete. The Normans began as wanderers without a country and ended as the founders of three. They had no philosophy but courage, no scripture but ambition, and yet they built nations that outlived their names. Today, the word Norman belongs to museums, place names, and forgotten chronicles. But if one listens carefully to the toll of a church bell in Canterbury, to the arches of Palermo glowing at dusk, to the language of law and the rhythm of discipline that runs through modern life, one still hears the echo of their spirit. For what they left behind was not merely power or monuments, but a conviction that discipline could turn chaos into creation, that faith could stand beside curiosity, and that even men born in storms could learn to build in sunlight. The Normans had risen, ruled, and fallen. But their spirit, daring, restless, constructive, became part of civilization itself. And in that sense, they never truly disappeared. At dusk, the northern sea grows quiet. The tide retreats from the cliffs of Normandy, and the wind that once filled the sails of dragons now brushes the grass in silence. There are no banners, no horns, no armies, only the murmur of waves and the whisper of memory. It was here that the story began, among cold waters and restless men who refused to stand still. From these shores, they set out with oars and faith, carrying no crown, no scripture, only courage and hunger. They were called Northmen, wanderers without a home. But the world they touched, England, Sicily, Antioch, still bears their fingerprint, faint but indelible, like the tide's mark upon the sand. If you listen closely, you can still hear them. In the bell of a cathedral, ringing above the English mist. In the call to prayer that once echoed beside Norman domes in Palermo. In the laws that govern nations born centuries after their dust settled. In the very language spoken by millions, where Norman words, justice, honor, crown, courage, still shape thought itself. The sea took them and gave them back as kings. It taught them motion, and through motion they found creation. They carried with them the discipline of the North and the imagination of the South. And somewhere between those two, they built a world. No empire lasts forever. Their castles crumble, their lineages blur, their bones sleep beneath forgotten stone. But civilization is not measured by crowns, nor by conquests. It endures through what is built, learned, and remembered. The Normans learned to turn storm into structure, to channel chaos into beauty. From that lesson, Europe was reborn. The rule of law, the craft of stone, the fusion of tongues, all are quiet monuments to their restless will. And so the circle closes where it began. The wind still travels over the channel, the same wind that once carried their ships to destiny. The stars they followed still burn above the horizon. And somewhere in that endless rhythm of sea and time, the spirit of the Normans still moves. Patient, proud, unbroken. They came as wanderers. They became conquerors. They left as builders. And the sea, eternal and forgiving, remembers their names.